Hey, welcome back. This is Farm Talk. I'm Mick Kerr, and every once in a while, for the last couple of years, more than a couple of years, visited with a guy who grew up in the part of the world where I grew up in, but now he lives in Colorado. Not for the reason you might be thinking. You were Paul Drocke of Central Life Sciences, Mr. Bug-Free Grains. You were in Colorado long before it got popular for the reason that it's recently popular for.
Yeah, you could say that. Yep. Been there for about 10 years now already, and just is one of those things that, honestly, if you don't go looking for it, you don't find it. And I've caught a lot of grief about the whole issue early on, but anymore now I don't. I've only ever once had one question as to whether or not we could use any of our products on hemp, and it's like, we just don't go there. It's not labeled for it, so we don't go there.
All right, but it is labeled for wheat and beans and corn too?
It's Dicon as itself is labeled for any stored food commodity. So that means we can pretty much use it on anything that we're growing in the state of North Dakota, to keep the bugs out. There's a few things that we don't see a lot of need for. One of those is primarily soybeans. Soybeans don't typically get a lot of insect damage or even infestation in them. Part of the reason for that is because they're so hard, the insects have a hard time penetrating it, and there's other things that are usually available, so they go to the softer crops, if you would. Mm-hmm. They love oats and barley more than anything else because they're the softest, and it's the easiest for them to get into and start making damage and lowering our profits.
But could this year be different? Because a lot of people are not going to sell their, that's what they've always done, haul those beans to town off the combine and either pay a little storage or sell them when it's appropriate or right off the combine. And this year, I don't know if they're going to pile them on the ground, but
I would doubt they'll pile corn on the ground, but it's very rarely have I ever seen soybeans piled on the ground.
Yeah.
If you get to a facility or on the farm where they're actually storing the beans longer, we may see some Indian meal moth that start getting into them, and those are always on the top of the bins, and it's that green webby stuff that you get up there that it's just a mess. Yeah. And we have seen some inquiries from that standpoint on soybeans, but only when we get to a point where they're storing them longer than what they typically have in the past, Mick, and that's where that's where we can see that, so they can go in and they can do some treating to take care of the Indian meal moth.
Yeah, but last week at Farm Fest, the refrain I heard a little more than regular years in the past is that I still got last year's corn in the bin. I've still got last year's wheat in the bin. And so there's going to be a lot more storage for a lot longer again. And looks like we've had some warm, moist conditions. Are we
setting ourselves up?
Yeah. And do guys need to pre-treat the bin here?
Well, let me give you, this morning I was down in Holloway, Minnesota, and I was doing a meeting with the co-op down there, and one of the challenges that we see a lot of times from the elevator situation is grain that's coming in off the farm that has bug infestation in it. So, yes, we know that we're seeing that already. And so as we start looking at that, what do we do to prepare that? Well, you got to go all the way back to when that bin is empty and start there. And, even outside the bin, we want to make sure that the grass is mowed around the bins. That's a harbinger for these insects. Preferably if it's gravel, you've taken and sprayed it out so that there are no weeds growing or anything around those bins. Then you want to go inside. You want to clean the bin out. The commodity or the typical saying in the industry is that if you can tell what commodity was stored in that bin previously, it's not clean enough. Mm-hmm. So we need to really make sure that we're getting it cleaned out because especially if that's going to sit for any amount of time before you refill it, we're going to see some bug infestation that's going to get started with that. They love to feed on the dust, the small particles of it. So there's a good opportunity that you probably are looking at bugs that are underneath the air floors. And we don't typically see air floors getting pulled up in order to clean out from underneath them. So let's make sure when we go in there and we spray them down, we use a product. Our preference is to use Dicon Plus. which is a combination of our Dicon, which is an insect growth regulator, and our Sentinel, which is an adulticide. And we're going to go in there, we're going to spray that floor down, we're going to spray it down good enough so that some of it is penetrating and going into the lower level. We're going to spray up the sidewalls as far as we can. We're going to spray around the outside. A 10-foot perimeter around the bin would be a good tool to use that way. And then we go up the foundation. The label does not allow us to spray the bin, the steel of the bin on the outside to prevent runoff, but we can spray that foundation and then where the bin sits on that foundation. And it's a simple method. We call it the 1-1-1. That's 1 ounce of Dicon Plus in 1 gallon of water per 1,000 square feet.
1-1-1.
Yep.
I can remember that.
Yep. And so it's pretty simple to do that. It's going to be extremely cost comparative to other products that are on the market. And the biggest advantage is that we have a full ag label, which means we can spray it on more than just the cracks and the crevices. We can do a broadcast spray across the entire floor of that bin or the flat storage if they're going into flat, and be able to do that and be fully on label to do it from that perspective, which is one of those things. I mean, we always say that the label is the law,
right,
and you want to make sure you understand what it is you're doing.
At the end of every commercial is always read and follow label instructions.
That's correct.
And there's a lot more slotted floors out there with the new, the bins that producers have compared to the bins Dad had. So the grain is a lot more vulnerable, I guess, from the bottom.
Well, it is, because that's where they're gonna be during the time when the bin is empty. Most of those bins, you cannot, you can't turn the fans on when the bins are empty, because you'll have a tendency you can actually lift the floor. So it's very difficult to get underneath there and clean them. You can pull them out and clean them and put the floor back in, but it's a lot of work. So that's where we try to make sure that we get it sprayed down as you're going into there. So
okay.
I did come up with a new motto the other day. Right now we're doing all of our ad campaigns are looking at the just saying no to bugs. And this is your grain. This is your grain on bugs. Well, I came up with a new one the other day that it's like, if you fill them, they will come.
Yeah. Yeah, like weeds. If you grow them, they'll become resistant. If you spray them, they'll be resistant. The bugs are going to show up when you got a food source there.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when you're going to get the infestation. You also have to remember that these insects, you take a female, and if she starts to lay eggs, at the end of the 4th generation, you're going to go from one single female to 1 billion.
Wow.
And so as I always ask people, it's like, well, how many of them do I have to control?
All of them.
No, you just have to control the one, because if you control the one, you don't get the rest of them.
Man.
So that's where, a preventative product like what we work with really is beneficial, because we can prevent that one. And so we don't get the 1 billion.
Amazing. Well, boy, that's exponential. 1 to 1 billion in 4 generations. Wow.
Yeah.
So, and again, as we come out of summer here and go into fall, things are going to start cooling down, and the grain is going to be a fantastic food source. You mentioned that you were down at the grain elevator earlier. Is there grain coming off the farm into the bin with bugs in it that's getting another discount or being rejected?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the biggest thing that I talk with when I'm working with elevator locations, Mick, is to get to a point where everybody works extremely hard to have customer and have a solid customer base, and there are going to be times when those growers on the farm are going to have some issues that come up, and they're going to have bug infestations. So what do you do with it? And a lot of times, they're going to bring it into the elevator. And some of them will just flat out reject it, which never makes anybody happy. It doesn't make the elevator happy, and it certainly doesn't make the customer happy. So the goal would be to get to a point where the elevator can take that grain and treat it with, if it's going to be short-term storage, we're going to treat it with Sentinel and PBO8. PBO8 is a synergist. It just makes the Sentinel work that much better. Technically, what a synergist does is it inhibits the insect's ability to metabolize the insecticide. And they can treat it that way then and set it aside, preferably in a separate bin that they would collect that type of grain in, and let it sit there for up to 2 weeks, and then they could go ahead and put it back in, because they're going to have killed off all of the adults, and anything that's still in there is going to, as they come out of the pupa stage or the larva, and as they emerge from the seed, then they're going to be exposed to the product, and it would take care of them. So
yeah, all right. Bugfreegrains.com is the place to go for a lot of education. I know farmers are really thinking about reducing expenses this year. The ag economy is kind of very challenged. Prices are very challenged, but reducing expenses on insects in the grain bin could even be more damaging if you don't do that.
Correct. We had one of our guys down in the Missouri area had a customer that really kept close track, and this last harvest season, so the 2017 harvest season, they had treated with our three-way product on corn, and the previous year they had not done any of that, and their record showed that on that 16 crop that they brought in, when they emptied it, their average test weight was actually a pound lower than what it was in 17, the year that they treated. So they gained. They didn't gain. They protected a full pound per bushel.
Very good. All right, Paul Drocke, Central Life Science, bugfreegrains.com. We'll see you at the farm shows.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We'll be right back.